Hi everyone, this is Reverend Josh at Boise First United Church of Christ. We're so glad you've chosen to listen to our sermon this morning. We hope that you find yourself encouraged as we meet you wherever you are on life's journey.
I want you to think about the last time maybe you said to somebody, "Don't judge me." Maybe it was a friend. Maybe you're sort of explaining a choice away that you didn't understand or that they didn't understand. Maybe it was someone defending a decision that hurt somebody else. Or maybe it was you getting defensive. I don't know. Saying it to someone who was trying to hold you accountable for something that you weren't really ready to look too closely at. In 2016, I remember I went on a date. It was the 4th of July. And we met for dinner. We went to watch the fireworks. We had a beautiful blanket sitting out, and you got the butterflies in your stomach because it's the first time you've ever been around this person. And towards the end of this date, I gave him a huge hug and thought that it had gone wonderfully and couldn't wait to hear back. Ever been there? And then he ghosted me. If you don't know what ghosted means, it means they just disappeared. They don't respond. And I thought that evening went great, but I was surprised that clearly that wasn't a mutual feeling. So I texted him multiple times, "Hey, I really just wish you would respond, tell me why it didn't vibe or why it didn't connect. I really need closure." I was pretty new to dating in 2016, and eventually he did respond, and his text threw me. His text said, "I'm not interested in dating a fellow white person who is so unaware of their racial bias and coded racism." I was dumbfounded. I was so confused. I persisted and I said, "What do you mean? What are you talking about? I really don't understand you. I'm definitely not a racist. I don't have a racist bone in my body," I said. And he just ignored my text again. And so I persisted. I just really cannot sleep now. I've got to know more. Please respond to me. And then I just couldn't understand. And so finally, he responded, and long text began to lay out. He said, halfway through our date, we were sitting on the blanket, awkwardly cuddled up next to each other, and you decided to reach over and kiss me. He said, which was lovely. But however, I noticed that your response was very concerning. So after I kissed him, I saw there were some folks behind us that were Hispanic, and they were talking in another language. And I immediately turned to him and I said, "They've got to be talking about us, I bet. Because they've been speaking English all evening, and now all of a sudden, now that we've kissed, they're talking in another language. Surely they're talking about us." And he didn't say anything when I said that. And so I said, "Did you hear me?" And he said, "Uh-huh," which I was not perceptive enough to pick up that did not set well with him. And then looking back now, of course, I know that was in many ways my own insecurities about being gay and being out in public. Later then on our walk home back to my apartment, I said, "Hey, do you see that convenience store? It doesn't really fit here, does it?" It was a convenience store that was mostly frequented by people of color. And my neighborhood was just 3 blocks from Northwestern University, which was a very wealthy neighborhood with mostly white college students and upper-class families. And in the middle of it was this mostly POC convenience store. And again, he said nothing. He just sat in the silence of it. Both of these statements, I can now see how they were coded racism. How they revealed something in my heart that I wasn't ready to face and I hadn't even recognized. I bet they're talking about us every time I hear somebody speak in another language that's not mine. Or that neighborhood, certain stores and certain establishments shouldn't be in certain neighborhoods, was deeply ingrained in me that I didn't even realize how suspicious it was. And the belief that he was just judging me rose up quickly, and so my response to his email was, "How dare you judge me?" In which, of course, he responded and said, "And this is why I ghosted you." The whole statement of "don't judge me" has kind of become a great conversation ender, hasn't it? It's sort of the ultimate mic drop or door closing, and often it's even quoted with Jesus, right? "Judge not," people will say, which is from Jesus. It's in the Bible. Jesus said it. That settles it. You shouldn't judge me. How dare you find things in my life that you would observe or call out for me to examine? And I don't think, however, that Jesus ever meant those two words to actually end the conversation, judge not. I think we've turned one of the most misunderstood sentences in the whole Bible into a shield, when I think Jesus actually invited it to be a mirror. So today I want to start, we're going to start a 4-week series where we're talking about misquoting Jesus, reclaiming what he likely meant. And so we're going to do different quotes over the next 4 weeks. Now I say what he likely meant because, again, I don't know Jesus' heart or mind. And we don't want to be presumptuous and say, well, we've got the right translation here. But this is what I think, perhaps. Perhaps this is what likely Jesus meant. Over the next few weeks, we're going to take some of the most familiar things, and we're going to look at them and examine them. So let's look at Jesus' words in Matthew chapter 7, beginning in verse 1. Jesus says, this is a Sermon on the Mount, so folks are sitting on a mountainside, and he's teaching them. And he says, do not judge, for you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and not pay attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when all the time there is a plank in your own? You hypocrite. First, take the plank out of your own eye, then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye or your sibling's eye. So for some context here, we're on the Sermon on the Mount. So the Sermon on the Mount, if you don't know it, it's one of Jesus's most classic epic sermons. He sort of offers great critique and thought. This sermon is very based on, you've heard it said, but I say to you. So Jesus is often, one might say, he's deconstructing their Jewish understanding of how they've been taught for centuries how to interpret Scripture. You ever been there? Where somebody sort of pokes at your beliefs, and you're like, oh, well, I always thought this, and now you're kind of making me question that. That's what Jesus does. He really upset them. And so they're on the Mount. He gives this sermon, and it's important to remember that when he gives this sermon, the intent is he's trying to teach his followers how they're supposed to live in their bodies, how they're supposed to treat one another. So this sermon isn't necessarily like teaching people how to run a good courtroom or how to be a good judge or a good lawyer. This is not a legal case. This is how to live and love the people around you in your lives. So something to notice there. Second thing to notice is that this idea of a hyperbole, right? In Jewish teachings in the first century, it was very normal to have these sort of exaggerated examples, right? So you talk about the sawdust and this log, right? You're going to remember that. It sticks in your mind because, remember, it's an oral tradition. Many of them don't have abilities to read. The printing press does not exist. And so you have to come up with these wild ways to help people remember the moral truths that you're trying to communicate. And so Jesus comes up with these. And I find this example to be lovely because it kind of makes me feel like Jesus has a sense of humor. I'm like, oh, he's kind of like sassy, he's a little sarcastic, he's kind of funny. Like, I love the thought that like Jesus is funny because I just feel like everybody's so serious about him. And he is very serious, and I love that. But also, like, he can be really funny if we can actually just imagine the humanity of it and the ways in which he uses certain examples in his sermons. So that's the second thing to notice here as we understand this. The third thing is I think the word judge in Greek is very interesting. The word is krino. And if you really dig down into what this word means in the Greek, it means to notice a problem. I'm sorry, it doesn't mean to notice a problem. It doesn't mean to notice a problem. It means to render a final verdict on someone's whole worth. So it might actually be better translated, do not condemn. Do not condemn. Because this word was associated with a sort of justice system of a court where a judge would hear a case, judge it, right, as a judge does, and then determine a final verdict. This is your life sentence, or this is what you're worth, or this is who you are. And we know that in our society still today, people are often defined by their worst moment, right? Oh, that person's a felon, or oh, that person is an addict, right? And it's like, wow, we're so much more than the one thing, right? I have an addiction, or I spent time in prison, or I experienced homelessness, but I am not a homeless person, as in like, that's all that I am. And so we often can do that. We can just sort of summarize somebody up, like the whole of their life by this one thing. And so Jesus is saying here in this passage something that I think is really beautiful. He's saying, listen, you are not judge and jury. You are not called to make final verdicts about people, to determine and to throw them away or cast them away or determine how they should be treated in the world. So maybe the reality is this passage could be better translated, do not condemn others than judge, because we can't all help but judge, right? Literally, it's just we're called every day to discern about the people that we're around, whether that's coworkers or people we see out in the community, whether that's our politicians. We're not supposed to be like just empty vessels that have no thoughts about anybody, right? You should be discerning. You should be assessing. You should be wise. You shouldn't just say, oh, I just can't have any thoughts about anybody. That would not be good. You'd be in a lot of therapy for a lot of trauma because you would just be treaded over all the time. But beauty of this is instead the response is not that you might not take an assessment of the people around you, but instead may you not condemn them regardless of how you assess in the end. What is also interesting, I think, about this particular passage is that it assumes that you will help your kin with what actually is in their eye. Notice if you read it, it never says, like, never notice the speck and never help them. It says, first notice it in you, so that you can then help the others. So it's really an invitation to, like, you need to not be a hypocrite and be this person who is incredibly judgmental towards others and quick to not extend grace to others. But then when you make mistakes, it's like, oh, everybody makes mistakes. It's fine. I want forgiveness from others. I want grace. It's to actually learn that the goal is to earn the right to offer the feedback through humility. That somebody doesn't think you are just the most self-righteous person. Sometimes I have these conversations with my husband. My husband's very quick to apologize when we are in debates or conversations, arguments. And sometimes I'm like, I need to be proven why I am in the wrong before I offer the apology. And so we kind of have to meet each other in the middle because he's quick to apologize, and then I have to ask, well, what are you apologizing for? Can you specifically lay out the offense so that I make sure you fully understand it, right? And then I'm on the other side of it where my response is, well, I need you to explain to me why I should apologize. And then I'll apologize. Convince me, right? And so we often have to find ourselves somewhere in the middle, because that sense of pride in myself that I have to humble myself. And well, maybe actually I shouldn't put that full onus on the other person. Maybe I should be humble enough to be able to go inward and actually look, like, why might he be hurt here? What might I have done? Even if I don't think that, I intended that, my intent might have been different. And so sometimes the onus can't be fully on him. I have to be able to be humble enough to step back, to assess it, and go, wow, I do make mistakes here too. And just like I want him to be gracious towards me, I must too be gracious towards myself, right? And in the grace towards myself, I'm able to extend greater grace towards him. And so this is the dance that I think Jesus is talking about here. You may know the story that maybe connects to this most deeply in Scripture, which is in John chapter 8. It's a story, right, where Jesus comes and the woman has been brought for the act of adultery, and all the religious leaders are ready to stone her for this act. And Jesus comes and stops them from throwing the stones at her. And he says to her, says to those in the crowd, let him without sin cast the first stone. Notice we don't see the man. We don't see the man who she's caught with in adultery dragged to the middle of the town square, just the woman. So that's already, Jesus is already like, wow, you're already missing the mark here. Okay, you're just judging, it takes two to tango for adultery, honey. So, and then he says, neither do I condemn you to this woman when everybody drops the stones. And then the very next breath, though, he ends it with, go and sin no more. So he offers grace with accountability. He says, assess something. Assess your behavior, but also you are not like a worse sinner than the rest of these people around you in this circle here. And so why would your punishment be worse than theirs? They're clearly not looking inward, because if they did, they'd recognize that they too should get stoned. And Jesus isn't interested in any of us getting stoned. You didn't hit that. Okay, that's fine. Now you got it. A little delayed. Psychologists have named this concept after Jesus diagnosed it 2,000 years ago. Jesus did so without a psychology degree, but psychologists would call this fundamental attribution error, okay? So it's our wiring toward explaining our failures by circumstances. For instance, when I mess up, I was just really tired, or I was really stressed, or I didn't mean it that way. But when someone else does something, they're lazy, they're selfish. That's just who they are, right? We give ourselves the benefit of the doubt of context and other people the verdict of character. And Jesus names this blind spot in this passage 2,000 years ago, not in clinical terms, but in spiritual terms. And so what if Jesus is just inviting us to look at ourselves before we look at our neighbors, right? I'm worst at this when I'm driving. Anybody makes a mistake? Oh, that's cute. Good job, Jane. I love these. Jane makes these slides, and she does an amazing job. Thank you so much. That was me before I lost all my weight. I'm teasing. So I'm very quick to, that's not me, just so you know. I'm very quick to judge anybody on the road. Why would you do that? You idiot. What are you thinking? Why did you do that? You need to learn how to drive. Like, these people in Boise don't know what they're doing. Those kind of things. But then the minute I make a mistake, I'm like, oh, wow, that was really quick to judge and honk that horn. Or, I'm really sorry. You can be a little more gracious here, right? Do the same things. I'm like, you don't know. This other thing over here, let me explain to you. And in New York City, we don't drive. And so when we get angry with each other, there was no horns honking. We would just yell at each other. You would say, like, you're an idiot. What are you doing? Get out of my way. And here we just communicate through nothing, just weird cutting off. There's no horns. But I do honk my horn. And my husband's like, you can't do that here. Don't honk your horn here. They're going to think that you're from Oregon. And so, I think the beauty of this example is that that's exactly what Jesus is saying. Man, you are quick to judge others, but you do the same stuff, or you make mistakes too. And maybe you could extend grace to the others as you have extended grace into yourself. Are you tracking with me? That's only a few yeses. That's not good. I think Jesus in this passage is calling us to humility over superiority. Was this person who was also willing to look at themselves also willing to look at me at the same time? We live in a world where cancel culture is deep in our bones. We live in a time when those cancel culture is raging on both of our political sides, where people are often canceled for making a mistake, told, cast aside and forgotten and unredeemable, how terrible they are, and there's no way back integrated into community and society. And I don't know about you, but that feels like the most post-Christian expression of our society that I'm experiencing today. That there is no ability for people to change or to grow, to evolve, that we haven't created a space for people to say, yeah, I did make some really racist comments on a date, and I'm really embarrassed by it. And I didn't recognize it at the time, but now I've looked inward and I can see that, wow, yeah, I had some things there I needed to do some work on. And to be able to stand up in a pulpit in front of all of you and say, wow, racism is in my bones. I've been conditioned for it. I don't even recognize it. And a lot of our society, if you said that, that little bit would be picked up and put into the media, depending on your position of power, and it could be weaponized against you. And I don't know about you, but that doesn't feel like the way in which Jesus has called us to create grace and room for people to evolve, to become. And I think that Jesus is calling us to a different and a better way. So as we wrap up this sermon this morning, I want to ask you to consider a few things. The next time you feel the urge to render a final verdict on someone in your head or out loud or in the comment section on social media, pause. Ask yourself Jesus' question, what's in my eye right now? What's been in my eye in the past? How have I grown or changed? How have I been gracious with myself? When I came out, I had been on a journey to accept myself. And I wanted everyone else to accept me right away. And I had to remind myself, it took me a long time to get here. And God knows I'm still trying to accept parts of myself. And why would it not take others also time? How can I extend them the same grace for their journey of evolution as I have myself? The second thing I want us to think about is if there's someone in our lives that we've canceled, that we've written off, that we've decided they're unredeemable, the verdict has come in, we've condemned them, and we've decided the door is permanently shut and closed for them. And I want to gently ask you, is that Jesus' judgment or yours? Is there room somewhere for a go and sin no more, but I too do not judge you, instead of a life sentence? Jesus never told us to stop caring about right or wrong, to call out the injustices and the inequities and the hurt and the sin in the world. But he did tell us to start with ourselves, that we may be humble enough to look inward before we look outward, and gracious enough to still believe that no one, not them, not us, not our friends, not our enemies or our frenemies, is beyond the reach of growth, healing, repair, and change. So may we be a people who God may open our vision and change the world inward and outward. Amen? Amen.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Boise First UCC podcast. We hope you found inspiration, encouragement, and a deeper connection to your faith and community. If you enjoyed today's conversation, we encourage you to subscribe, to leave a review, or share with your friends and family so that they can more quickly find us. Also, if you benefited from today's podcast, we invite you to make a donation at boisefirstucc.org/donate. Until next time, may you go in peace with curiosity and courage and a heart full of hope as we look toward our progressive Christian faith.